I thought I was helping my coworker. Then HR called me in. I never thought a simple favor at work could turn my entire life upside down. It all started on a Monday morning, one of those gray, drizzly days when you drag yourself into the office and pray that no one asks you to do anything outside your job description. I was sipping my coffee, scrolling through emails, when Jenna, the coworker I had been helping for months, leaned over my desk with that sweet, pleading smile she always wore. "Hey, can you do me a huge favor?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I barely looked up, smiling politely. "Sure, what's up?" I should have hesitated, but I didn't. That was my first mistake. She explained that she was behind on a report, the same report that our manager had been asking for all week, and she begged me to help her get it done before the 3 p.m. deadline. Her tone was desperate but convincing, the kind that makes you feel like refusing would be cruel. I glanced at the spreadsheet on her screen. It was messy, half-complete, and honestly a bit chaotic, but nothing I couldn't handle in an hour or two. "Okay," I said, already feeling my chest tighten a little at the thought of adding more work to my plate. "I can help, but you owe me one." Jenna laughed lightly, the sound casual but carefully measured. "Of course, you're a lifesaver." That afternoon, I stayed late, working on her report, double-checking numbers, reformatting tables, and making sure everything looked flawless. I felt proud of myself, honestly. I had taken a mess and turned it into something professional and clean. She thanked me profusely when she picked it up at the end of the day. "I don't know what I would do without you," she said, smiling in a way that felt genuine, or so I thought. I went home that evening feeling exhausted but satisfied. Helping coworkers had always felt like part of my job, and I liked being the dependable one, the problem solver. I didn't suspect for a second that this small act of kindness would spiral into the worst professional nightmare of my life. The next morning, I arrived at the office with my usual energy, ready to tackle the week, when my manager, Ms. Franklin, called me into her office. My heart sank immediately. Something was wrong. Usually her tone was calm and precise, but there was a sharpness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Can you sit down for a minute?" she asked, motioning to the chair in front of her desk. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, is everything okay?" She folded her hands over a pile of papers. "HR would like to speak with you regarding yesterday's report." My stomach dropped. HR, I had done nothing wrong. I had stayed late, helped Jenna, made sure everything was accurate. What could this possibly be about? "About the report?" I asked, my voice slightly trembling. She nodded, her eyes never leaving mine. "Yes. Please come to HR now." I grabbed my bag, heart hammering, and walked down the hall, each step heavier than the last. When I entered the HR office, I was greeted by two unfamiliar faces, Mr. Lewis, the HR manager, and Ms. Carter, a senior HR representative. They gestured for me to sit, and I obeyed, feeling a cold sweat break across my forehead. "Thank you for coming," Mr. Lewis said. His tone was formal, almost robotic. "We need to discuss some discrepancies in a recent report submitted to management." I blinked, confused. "Discrepancies? I helped Jenna with her report yesterday. I made sure everything was accurate." Ms. Carter leaned forward slightly, her eyes scrutinizing mine. "We've received information that the report contained falsified data. This is a serious allegation, and we need to understand your involvement." My chest tightened, and I felt my stomach drop. Falsified data. That wasn't possible. I double-checked every number, every calculation. I had done the work myself. I don't understand," I stammered. "I reviewed the entire report. I didn't submit anything inaccurate." Mr. Lewis exchanged a glance with Ms. Carter, and there was a pause that felt endless. "We need full transparency. Please tell us exactly what you did and when you did it." I took a deep breath and explained everything. How Jenna had asked for help, how I stayed late, how I checked and corrected every entry. I explained every step, every calculation, every change I had made. I was careful, precise, hoping that honesty would make it clear that I had nothing to hide. But their faces remained unreadable, their expressions neutral, almost suspicious. And then came the moment that hit me like a punch. "We also received a statement from your coworker, Jenna, saying that you instructed her to alter certain figures to make the report appear more favorable than the actual performance," Ms. Carter said slowly. My throat closed. "What? That's not true. I never told her to do anything wrong. I only corrected the errors she already made." Mr. Lewis leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You understand that this is a serious violation. If these allegations are true, this could have significant consequences, including termination." My vision blurred slightly. My hands gripped the edge of the chair. No, you have it wrong. I was helping her. I didn't ask her to falsify anything. I was just fixing mistakes. I never even suggested changing numbers. Ms. Carter's eyes flicked to her notes, and her lips pressed together tightly. We will need to investigate further, but for now, please remain available for any follow-up questions. I left the office shaking, feeling like the floor had fallen out from under me. How could this happen? I had done everything right. I had been helpful. I had been responsible. And now my integrity was being questioned because of a coworker I had trusted, a coworker I had helped out of kindness. I walked back to my desk, heart pounding, and saw Jenna at her workstation, looking completely normal, smiling as though nothing had happened. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to confront her immediately, but something told me I needed to be careful. HR wasn't playing games, and if they thought I was involved in falsification, a single outburst could make things worse. I sat down at my desk, staring at the screen, trying to process. I kept repeating to myself, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. But the seed of fear had been planted, and it grew quickly, consuming every rational thought. Over the next few hours, my mind raced. Emails, phone calls, files. I replayed every interaction with Jenna, every decision I had made. I remembered the conversation, her desperate look, her pleading tone. I had thought I was helping. I had never imagined that she would lie about me, that she would turn my kindness into a weapon. And then I realized the truth. My life at work, the stability I had always counted on, was suddenly hanging by a thread, all because I had trusted the wrong person. The next few days were a blur of tension, whispered conversations, and constant worry. Every time I walked past Jenna's desk, I felt her eyes on me, sharp and calculating, like she knew exactly how much she had thrown my life into chaos. I tried to focus on my own work, but every notification, every email, every ring of the phone made my chest tighten. HR had asked me to stay available for questions, which in theory sounded simple enough, but in practice, it felt like walking on a tightrope over a pit of fire. One afternoon, Ms. Carter called me back into the HR office. I walked in, trying to appear calm, though my stomach was doing somersaults. She gestured for me to sit, her expression unreadable. "We've spoken with Jenna regarding the report," she began. My heart sank. "And," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maintains that you instructed her to alter figures," Ms. Carter said carefully. "We also noticed discrepancies in timestamps that indicate changes were made under your login credentials." I froze, my mind racing. That couldn't be right. I hadn't submitted anything. I had only corrected what she had done and left the submission to her. I didn't do that," I stammered. "I didn't change anything under my login. I was just helping her format the report." Ms. Carter's eyes were sharp. "We understand that you claim innocence, but we need a full account of every action taken on that report, including timestamps, drafts, and communications." I nodded, swallowing hard. I realized painfully that HR wasn't going to take my word alone. They were building a case based on digital traces, emails, and statements, and Jenna had already framed the narrative in her favor. That evening, I stayed late, combing through every draft, every message, every saved file I could find. I documented my work meticulously, noting times, changes made, and the exact instructions I had given, or rather, the lack of instructions that could have been misinterpreted. Each line I typed felt like a lifeline. I had to prove I wasn't guilty, or I risked losing everything: my reputation, my job, and the trust I had worked so hard to build over the years. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, armed with my documentation and a pounding headache. I was called into HR again, and this time, Mr. Lewis joined Ms. Carter at the table. They had printed copies of emails, showing where Jenna had asked for clarification on certain numbers, and my responses, carefully worded, advising her on formatting or correcting mistakes. "We've reviewed your records," Mr. Lewis began. "There are still some inconsistencies we need you to explain. For instance, in this email, you mention adjusting the sales projections. Can you clarify what you meant?" I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said slowly. "I was referring to correcting the way the figures were presented, not changing the underlying data. I never told her to alter results, never suggested falsifying anything. I only helped make the report readable and accurate." Ms. Carter's pen hovered over her notes. "We will need to verify this with the IT department. They will check logs to see exactly which changes were made under which accounts." I nodded, my stomach twisting. It was out of my hands now. I had done everything I could, but the fact that this could be manipulated digitally made me feel helpless. Over the next week, Whispers started circulating around the office. People who had once been friendly avoided my desk. Emails went unanswered. Lunch invitations disappeared. Every glance from a colleague felt loaded, judgmental. Even without HR confirming anything, the rumor mill had already begun to turn. I realized that Jenna had planted a seed that no one could see as anything other than truth. The fear in my chest grew into anxiety that followed me everywhere. I double-checked every email, every message I sent, terrified that something small might be twisted into another proof against me. One evening, after the office emptied, I stayed behind to organize my notes. I scrolled through my emails again, documenting every interaction, every clarification, every correction. My hands shook as I compiled screenshots, timestamps, and versions of documents. I realized that my career, my integrity, everything I had built, was now dependent on a series of digital proofs and my ability to convince HR that I hadn't done anything wrong. And through it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna was watching. Not literally, but in the way that manipulators leave their mark, the way they make you feel constantly aware of them, of their control. I kept asking myself, why would someone do this? We had been friendly, even somewhat close at times. I had trusted her, helped her. And yet, she had weaponized my kindness against me, turned it into a trap. By the end of that week, HR called me in once more. "We've completed a preliminary review," Ms. Carter said, her expression neutral but firm. "It appears that the adjustments to the report under your login were indeed formatting corrections and did not materially alter the data. However, we will continue to monitor and may require further clarification." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The office gossip hadn't stopped. People still looked at me with suspicion. Jenna walked by my desk with that infuriatingly innocent smile, as if nothing had happened. I realized that proving my innocence to HR wasn't the same as reclaiming my reputation among my coworkers. The social damage had already been done. I felt small, exposed, and trapped in a workplace where one act of kindness had been twisted into an allegation that almost ruined me. That night, I went home exhausted, heart pounding, and realized something critical. Surviving HR's scrutiny was only part of the battle. The next challenge was rebuilding trust, credibility, and respect among people who had seen me as guilty, even temporarily. And in that realization, I knew that the real work, the hard work, was only just beginning. The following weeks felt like walking through a storm with no end in sight. Every interaction at work carried weight, every glance seemed loaded with judgment, and every casual conversation left me wondering if someone else was interpreting my words as evidence of guilt. I had learned one hard truth. In a workplace, perception often matters more than reality. Jenna continued her performance, smiling, asking for help, acting as if she had done nothing wrong. I watched her carefully, noting the way she maneuvered around others, the way she subtly sowed doubt, the quiet manipulations she employed. I realized I couldn't confront her directly without risking escalation, but I could observe, document, and prepare. I started keeping meticulous records, not just of emails and reports, but of interactions, meetings, and casual conversations that could be twisted into proof by someone with an agenda. Each note I made, each timestamp I logged became armor. I also learned to be strategic in my responses. I stopped volunteering for extra work unless it was clearly within my scope. I began to phrase all communications in writing, leaving a clear trail that no one could misinterpret. I stopped sharing my workload with anyone without documenting it carefully. It was exhausting, but I felt a small sense of control return with each precaution I implemented. Despite all this, the office gossip persisted. People whispered, glanced, and sometimes outright avoided me. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could someone I had trusted so completely be so destructive? I replayed our past interactions in my mind, searching for signs I had missed, wondering how I could have been so naive. One afternoon, as I was finishing up my work, I overheard Jenna talking to another coworker. She laughed softly, almost conspiratorially, and my stomach sank when I realized she was recounting parts of the incident in a way that made me look incompetent and dishonest. That was the moment I decided I needed to act, not with aggression, not with confrontation, but with strategy. I started speaking more carefully, choosing words with precision, documenting interactions, and ensuring that any future allegations could be disproved with clear evidence. I realized that the workplace had become a game of chess, and I needed to think several moves ahead to protect myself. Slowly, I also began to rebuild my professional reputation, not through confrontation, but by demonstrating competence, reliability, and professionalism. I took on projects I could complete independently, delivered results that were verifiable, and remained calm under pressure. I noticed colleagues starting to see a different side of me, the version untouched by rumors or false allegations. It was a slow process, but each success, each acknowledgement of my work, felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity that Jenna had tried to undermine. One day, I received an unexpected email from HR. It was brief, neutral, but it held a note of closure. They had completed their investigation and found no evidence of intentional misconduct on my part. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that proving my innocence in HR's eyes didn't erase the social fallout or the betrayal I had experienced. I realized that Jenna's actions had permanently altered the social dynamics in our office, and I would need to rebuild relationships and trust carefully over time. That evening, I reflected on everything that had happened. I realized that my kindness, my willingness to help, had been weaponized, and that in the future I would need to balance generosity with caution. I learned that trust is a powerful thing, but it can be dangerous if placed in the wrong hands. And most importantly, I learned that resilience isn't just surviving. It's strategizing, observing, and reclaiming control over your life, even when someone else tries to take it from you. I had survived, yes, but I also knew that I had grown stronger, smarter, and more aware. I had learned to protect myself without losing my integrity, to act without being reckless, and to trust my instincts without letting fear dominate me. And in that quiet determination, I felt the first real sense of empowerment I had experienced since the nightmare began, a sense that no matter what Jenna did next, I would no longer be her victim. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice subtle shifts around the office. The whispers never fully stopped, but I could see hesitation in the glances, a flicker of doubt in the eyes of coworkers who had once believed Jenna's narrative without question. I realized that while proving myself to HR was one thing, proving myself to people who had seen only half the story was an entirely different battle. I decided to approach it cautiously, focusing on my work, my demeanor, and my interactions. Every email I sent was clear and concise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Every meeting, I prepared meticulously, ensuring that my points were undeniable, my professionalism visible. I smiled when appropriate, offered help when warranted, but always with an underlying layer of awareness that hadn't been there before. Slowly, colleagues began to notice. A coworker I had worried might avoid me entirely came over one afternoon to ask for advice on a project. I answered politely and thoroughly, and for the first time in weeks, I saw her eyes hold respect rather than suspicion. These small moments felt like victories, like tiny pieces of my professional life returning to my control. Meanwhile, Jenna's carefully crafted persona began to show cracks. She had relied on people not questioning her story, but as I quietly rebuilt my credibility, others began to notice inconsistencies in her behavior. Small things, the way she avoided direct questions, the subtle exaggerations she used to make herself look competent, the nervous glance when a supervisor asked for clarification. It wasn't dramatic, and I didn't point it out. I let her actions speak for themselves. The more I thrived professionally, the more her influence dwindled. But the hardest part wasn't just office politics. It was the personal toll the entire situation had taken on me. I replayed conversations endlessly, second-guessing my judgment and wondering how I had been so blind. I realized that the trauma of betrayal often lingers in ways that aren't immediately visible. I started journaling again, not just to document work, but to process emotions, clarify thoughts, and rebuild confidence. Each entry reminded me of one truth. I had done nothing wrong, and I had survived. One day, a major project landed on my desk, one that would define my performance review for the quarter. I saw it as an opportunity, not just to succeed, but to reclaim the respect and recognition that had been undermined by Jenna's lies. I threw myself into it with focus and precision, leaving no detail unchecked. By the time I presented it to my team, every chart, every figure, every recommendation had been double verified, carefully explained, and professionally packaged. The presentation was flawless, and the feedback was immediate, praise, acknowledgement, and even congratulations from colleagues who had been hesitant before. I felt a surge of validation, a confirmation that my professionalism and integrity had not been diminished. Jenna, of course, was present, but her confident mask faltered slightly under the attention I received. I didn't gloat, didn't call her out. I simply let my work speak. It was the first time in weeks that I felt a measure of empowerment returning. That night, I reflected on everything: the HR meetings, the whispers, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety. I realized that the path to reclaiming my life wasn't about confrontation or revenge. It was about quiet resilience, consistency, and demonstrating my true character over time. Betrayal had tried to define me, but I had chosen to redefine myself. I had learned to observe, to document, to act strategically, and to trust carefully. And in doing so, I had not only survived the storm, I had begun to thrive in its aftermath. The lessons were clear. Kindness can be dangerous if misplaced, trust must be measured, and resilience is forged in moments of quiet endurance. And as I walked through the office the next day, colleagues offering smiles, thanks, and recognition, I realized that my power had returned, not through confrontation, not through malice, but through steadfastness, intelligence, and integrity. I had survived being set up, and I had begun to reclaim my place, not just as a competent professional, but as someone whose strength could not be undermined by lies. And that, more than anything, felt like true victory. A few weeks later, I received a meeting request from Ms. Franklin, my manager. My stomach twisted as I clicked to accept, wondering if HR had been involved again or if Jenna had somehow found another way to complicate things. I arrived at her office early, taking a deep breath before knocking lightly. "Come in," she called. I stepped inside, trying to appear calm, professional, in control, though inside I was a whirlwind of nerves. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat, hands folded on my lap, trying not to fidget. She studied me for a moment, then spoke. "I've been reviewing your performance and the recent project work. I want to acknowledge that you've handled everything with professionalism despite the difficulties surrounding the report situation." Relief washed over me, but I stayed composed. "Thank you," I said softly. "I tried to stay focused and accurate." She nodded. "And it hasn't gone unnoticed. Your attention to detail, the way you documented every step, and your ability to handle pressure have been exemplary. You've earned the trust of your team again." I exhaled, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming. It felt surreal that after weeks of fear, whispers, and uncertainty, someone in a position of authority was validating my competence and integrity. "There's also another matter," she continued. "We've noticed some discrepancies in how certain coworkers have been interacting with others. We've addressed the issue internally, and we expect our team members to maintain professional behavior. I trust that things will improve from here." My mind immediately connected the dots. Jenna's influence had finally begun to wane, officially acknowledged by management. I nodded carefully, choosing my words. "I appreciate that, and I'll continue to maintain professional standards." As I left her office, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying lifted slightly. But I also knew the personal journey wasn't over. There was still Jenna, still the memories of betrayal, still the lingering anxiety from weeks of fear and uncertainty. Over the next few days, I observed her carefully. Her usual charm and smiles seemed forced, her confident posture just a little too precise. I realized she was aware that her previous manipulation was unraveling, but instead of feeling satisfaction or vengeance, I felt calm. I no longer needed her to falter publicly. Her credibility was quietly eroding on its own. And in that realization, I felt power, not the power of confrontation, but the power of control, of foresight, and of knowing my own worth. One afternoon, she approached me, attempting casual conversation. I kept my tone neutral, my expressions polite but distant. "Hey, about that report," she started. I held up a hand slightly. "I think we're clear on that, thank you," I said firmly. Her smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly masked it. I walked away, returning to my work, and felt a small thrill of independence. I no longer had to defend myself emotionally or react to her provocations. My professionalism, my composure, and the documentation I had maintained had created an unshakable foundation. By the end of that week, it was clear. The storm had passed. HR had closed the investigation, my manager had acknowledged my competence, and the office atmosphere was slowly returning to normal. I began to feel a quiet pride in how I had navigated the entire ordeal, not with anger, not with aggression, but with patience, intelligence, and careful observation. I had survived, but more importantly, I had learned invaluable lessons about trust, boundaries, and resilience. Late that evening, I sat at my desk reflecting on everything that had happened. The fear, the anxiety, the whispers, the betrayal, they had all been painful, but they had also forced me to grow, to develop skills I hadn't realized I possessed. I had learned to document meticulously, to observe carefully, to act strategically, and to trust my instincts. And I had discovered the depths of my own resilience. I realized that my experience, though harrowing, had equipped me to handle future challenges with confidence and composure. No one could manipulate me as easily again. No one could undermine my integrity without facing my meticulous attention to detail and careful strategy. I had been tested, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable. I had thought I was simply helping a coworker, but I had gained something far more valuable. The knowledge that I could navigate treachery without losing myself, that I could reclaim control over my life, my work, and my peace of mind. And in that realization, I felt a sense of closure, a deep and abiding understanding that I had survived the storm not just by chance, but by cultivating strength, intelligence, and resilience from within. The coworker who had betrayed me could never take away that growth. It was mine entirely, unshakable, and undeniable. By the time I reached the 6th week after the report incident, I had begun to feel something I hadn't in what felt like months, a cautious sense of normalcy. The tension in the office had lessened, whispers had become rarer, and my interactions with colleagues were slowly returning to a rhythm that felt familiar. But normalcy didn't erase the experience or the lessons I had learned. It amplified them. Each day, I noticed little signs of growth in myself, confidence in meetings, calm in the face of unexpected questions, and a newfound ability to read people's intentions before they acted. I realized that the ordeal with Jenna hadn't just tested me. It had reshaped me into someone more vigilant, more resilient, and more aware of professional dynamics. One morning, as I walked past her desk, she attempted a smile, the kind she once used to draw people in effortlessly. I returned a polite nod, nothing more. There was no malice in my response, no gloating, but something shifted in the room. It was subtle, but it was there. The recognition that I had survived her manipulations intact, and that my presence alone reminded everyone of the truth that had quietly emerged. I spent more time mentoring junior colleagues, offering guidance and support where needed, but always with careful boundaries. I found joy in helping others navigate projects and office dynamics without overextending myself or leaving room for misinterpretation. I realized that this balance, kindness paired with cautious strategy, was something I hadn't fully mastered before, but the recent months had forced me to learn it quickly. One afternoon, I received a message from HR, requesting a quick meeting to touch base regarding any remaining concerns. I was nervous, of course, but I had prepared myself mentally for this moment. Walking into the HR office, I was greeted by Ms. Carter's neutral smile. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We wanted to make sure you had everything you needed regarding the previous report situation, and that you felt comfortable moving forward in your role." I exhaled. "Yes, thank you. I do." She handed me a folder containing a formal acknowledgement. HR had closed the investigation, and no wrongdoing had been found on my part. Seeing the official documentation in my hands brought a mix of relief and vindication, though I kept my expression calm. It wasn't a trophy I needed to display. It was a confirmation of what I already knew. I had done nothing wrong. As I walked back to my desk, I noticed the subtle difference in how colleagues interacted with me. There was no need to point it out. The shift was visible in their body language, in the tone of their emails, in the casual ways they engaged in conversation. The whispers had faded, and I realized I had quietly reclaimed my place. But the most significant change wasn't in the office, it was in me. I had faced betrayal head-on, navigated manipulation with care, and emerged with my integrity intact. I had learned to observe, to document, to act strategically, and to trust selectively. I understood now that resilience wasn't just enduring. It was cultivating skills and awareness that allowed you to protect yourself while still maintaining your values. That evening, I sat alone at my apartment, reflecting on the events of the past month and a half. The fear, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, They had all been real and exhausting, but they had also been transformative. I realized that my perception of strength had changed. It wasn't loud, aggressive, or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and intelligent. It was the ability to maintain composure, to make calculated decisions, and to act with integrity even when the world seemed determined to undermine you. I began journaling again, not out of necessity, but out of gratitude for the lessons learned. I wrote about the fear, the betrayal, the long nights of uncertainty, and the small victories that had carried me through. I documented how each action I had taken had been deliberate, strategic, and aligned with my core values. And as I wrote, I realized something profound. The incident with Jenna, painful as it had been, had given me a gift I hadn't anticipated. It had forced me to grow, to sharpen my instincts, and to recognize my own worth. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. Not because the external situation had been perfect, but because internally I had reached a place of clarity, strength, and acceptance. I knew I would encounter challenges in the future, but I also knew I now had the tools, knowledge, and resilience to handle them. And in that moment, I understood a vital truth. Surviving betrayal doesn't just mean avoiding harm. It means reclaiming control, protecting yourself, and learning to thrive in spite of adversity. I smiled softly, realizing that the girl who had trusted blindly and been manipulated was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced deceit, navigated fear, and emerged stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. And that knowledge, more than any acknowledgement from HR, more than any office gossip, more than anything Jenna could have done, was mine, and mine alone. By the time I reached the 7th week after the report incident, I could feel the tension around me finally begin to dissolve. The office was returning to a rhythm that felt almost normal, and I realized that the storm had passed not because of confrontation or vindication, but because I had weathered it with patience, strategy, and unwavering integrity. Colleagues approached me more freely, asking questions, sharing updates, and seeking advice, and I noticed that respect had quietly returned. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Jenna, once so confident in her manipulation, had retreated into a quieter, more cautious demeanor. I didn't gloat, I didn't call attention to her mistakes. I simply observed, noting the subtle cracks in her facade, and focused on my own work. I realized that the real victory wasn't in seeing her stumble. It was in reclaiming my own power, my own sense of self, and my place in the professional world. One afternoon, as I walked past her desk, she gave me the briefest nod, hesitant, almost as if testing me. I smiled politely, acknowledging her, but kept my distance. In that brief interaction, I understood that her influence had crumbled, not because I had exposed her, but because my strength and consistency had made it irrelevant. I had become untouchable, not by force, but by resilience. Outside of the office, I began to notice changes in myself that had little to do with work. I felt calmer in social situations, more discerning in friendships, and far more attuned to subtle dynamics in any relationship. The betrayal that had once left me paralyzed with anxiety had transformed into a powerful lesson in trust, boundaries, and self-preservation. I even found myself offering guidance to others who were navigating workplace challenges, sharing insights about maintaining integrity and handling difficult colleagues, without ever exposing Jenna or reliving my trauma. Helping others navigate their own struggles became a source of quiet satisfaction and personal growth. One evening, I reflected on the entire ordeal while sitting at my desk, pen in hand. I thought about the fear, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, and the way I had second-guessed every decision. And yet, I also thought about the meticulous documentation I had kept, the careful observation of others, the strategic patience I had cultivated, and the unwavering commitment to my own integrity. I realized that each step I had taken had not only preserved my career, but had strengthened my character. I had been tested, yes, but I had emerged stronger than I could have imagined. I knew now that betrayal could shake the foundations of your world, but it could never touch your inner strength if you were prepared, aware, and deliberate. The most powerful moment came quietly, unexpectedly, when a junior coworker approached me and said, "I just want to thank you for how you handled everything. You set a great example." I smiled, feeling a deep warmth and sense of accomplishment. No words about Jenna, no need to boast, just the recognition that I had survived and, more importantly, thrived. In that moment, I realized that the story didn't belong to the coworker who had tried to manipulate me. It belonged to me, Every lesson learned, every act of careful strategy, every ounce of resilience, I owned it all. I had thought I was helping a coworker, only to find myself trapped in a nightmare of lies and accusations. But through that trial, I had discovered a truth more valuable than any professional accolade: the strength to face adversity, the wisdom to navigate deception, and the courage to reclaim your life on your own terms. And as I closed my notebook that evening, a sense of calm settled over me. I had faced betrayal, survived scrutiny, and emerged with my integrity intact. The girl who had trusted blindly was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced manipulation, navigated fear, and discovered a well of inner strength she hadn't known existed. That realization, quiet, profound, and unshakable, was the true victory. And with it, I knew I was ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. In the days that followed, I noticed a quiet shift not just in the office, but within myself. The tension that had once followed me like a shadow was gone. I could walk down the hallways without feeling the weight of whispered judgment or anxious glances. My colleagues interacted with me openly again, and I realized that the subtle rebuilding of trust, step by step, had succeeded. But more than anything, I noticed a profound change in the way I saw the world. Betrayal had been a cruel teacher, but it had taught me lessons I could never unlearn. I had learned to value clarity over assumption, strategy over impulsivity, and self-respect over blind loyalty. The kindness I had once offered freely no longer came with naivety. I had discovered a balance: generosity tempered with awareness, compassion paired with discernment. One evening, I found myself reflecting on how everything had begun, how a simple act of helping a coworker had led to weeks of fear, uncertainty, and heartache. It was almost surreal to think that the same gesture that had been used against me had also ignited a journey of growth. I realized that life often presents tests in unexpected forms, disguising lessons as obstacles and challenges as betrayals. And while I had once felt powerless, I now recognized the power I had always held: the power to observe, to act thoughtfully, and to reclaim control over my own narrative. Jenna, of course, continued to occupy the office space around me, but her presence no longer intimidated or unsettled me. I treated her professionally, kept my boundaries firm, and let my competence speak for itself. There was no need for confrontation, no desire for revenge. I understood now that victory wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about standing unshaken in my own truth. A few months later, during a team meeting, I noticed something unexpected. A junior employee, someone new who had witnessed parts of the office dynamics but not the entire saga, turned to me and asked, "How do you stay so calm under pressure?" I smiled, remembering the weeks of anxiety, sleepless nights, and moments where I had felt completely out of control. "Experience," I said softly, and then, after a pause, added, "and the understanding that you can only control yourself, not others. That makes all the difference." The team nodded, some with curiosity, others with admiration, and I realized in that moment how far I had come. I had survived manipulation and emerged stronger, not because I had acted aggressively, not because I had sought revenge, but because I had remained true to myself, consistent in my integrity, and strategic in my choices. That night, I sat alone at my apartment, the city lights casting a soft glow across the room, and I thought about the journey from fear to empowerment. I realized that the betrayal I had experienced would always be a part of my story, but it would not define me. It was a chapter, not the whole book. I had written the ending in my own words through my resilience, my careful planning, and my unwavering commitment to honesty and professionalism. And as I closed my journal, a sense of profound peace settled over me. I knew I had been tested, challenged, and nearly broken, but I had survived, I had learned, and I had grown. The lessons would stay with me forever. Trust wisely, protect your boundaries, act with integrity, and never underestimate your own strength. In that realization, I felt a deep, unshakable confidence. I had been betrayed, challenged, and doubted, but ultimately I had claimed my truth. And nothing, not whispers, not lies, not fear, could ever take that from me. The storm had passed. I had endured, I had prevailed, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and unbroken. And in that quiet victory, I finally understood something essential. Survival is not just enduring what comes at you, but reclaiming your power, your peace, and your integrity in the aftermath. I had done exactly that, and in doing so, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed: a strength that would guide me through every challenge yet to come.